Dispatch confirmed my check-in at 700 on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was still in my truck. Engine running. Pack on the passenger seat. Gas station coffee going cold between my knees. Parked at a trailhead 11 miles from the tower. I hadn't touched a radio, hadn't transmitted anything, hadn't spoken to a single person since the gas station in Lapine 3 hours south. My phone buzzed. Automated district notification. Spruce Peak Lookout. Lane. G. Station check-in received 0700. Status. Operational. The time was 7:04. Dispatch confirmed my check-in at 700 on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was still in my truck. Engine running. Pack on the passenger seat. Gas station coffee going cold between my knees. Parked at a trailhead 11 miles from the tower. I hadn't touched a radio, hadn't transmitted anything. I looked at the notification. I looked at the trail leading up through the trees. I looked at the radio mounted under the dash, which I had not turned on. The system had me logged. On station. Operational. For something I had not done. At a place I had not yet reached. 4 minutes ago. Hadn't spoken to a single person since the gas station in Lapine 3 hours south. My phone buzzed. Automated district notification. Spruce Peak Lookout. Lane. G. Station check-in received 0700. Status. Operational. The time was 7:04. My name is Garrett Lane. I'm 41 years old. Until January I was married to a woman named Dana, and until roughly 30 seconds before I read that notification, I was reasonably certain I was the only person using my name. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affair, no explosion. I looked at the notification. I looked at the trail leading up through the trees. I looked at the radio mounted under the dash, which I had not turned on. The system had me logged. On station. Operational. For something I had not done. At a place I had not yet reached. 4 minutes ago. My name is Garrett Lane. I'm 41 years old. Until January I was married to a woman named Dana, and until roughly 30 seconds before I read that notification, I was reasonably certain I was the only person using my name. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affair, no explosion. It was the quiet kind. Two people who like each other well enough discovering that one of them has been treating the marriage like a system instead of a relationship. That one was me. Dana said it plainly during one of our last real conversations. Living with you is like being a variable in someone else's equation. You don't even know you're doing it. That's the worst part. I didn't argue. I couldn't. She was describing something I recognized, but couldn't stop. Our daughter Margot is 9. She lives with Dana in the house I used to live in. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Bend that is smaller than I expected but has enough light. I see Margot on alternating weekends and one midweek dinner. The custody schedule is clean and structured, and I follow it precisely because following things precisely is the only mode I have left. When the Forest Service posted the Spruce Peak Lookout position, GS4, seasonal, 2-week solo rotation, East Slope Cascades, Deschutes National Forest. I applied because the job description read like a permission slip for the thing that ruined my marriage. Observe. Record. Report. Follow the procedure. Be consistent. The Forest Service doesn't ask you to be interesting or vulnerable or spontaneous. It asks you to fill in columns on time. I wanted a place where the thing that broke my home was the job requirement. That's why I was at the trailhead. That's why I drove 9 hours. And that's why the impossible check-in notification didn't make me turn around. It made me climb faster. 62 pounds, mile and a half. 900 feet of gain through switchbacks in lodgepole pine, breathing hard because I hadn't been at elevation in 2 years. The tower appeared at the last turn. 40-foot timber frame, glass observation cab on top, 14 by 14 feet. Catwalk on all four sides, lightning rod, grounding wires running down each corner post into the soil. Stairs up the outside in a steep zigzag, no railing on the upper flight. I stood at the base and looked up. That is exactly the right size for one person. The cab was clean, not just clean, set. Bunk made with tight corners. Propane stove wipe, burner caps aligned. The Osborne firefinder, the precision sighting instrument mounted on a steel pedestal in the center of the room, had a cloth cover placed over its alidade arm with care, not abandoned, prepared, like someone had left this space expecting a specific arrival. There were 2 clocks in the cab, a battery-operated wall clock above the door and a wind-up field clock on the desk beside the radio. The wall clock read 12:47. The field clock read 12:51. My watch read 12:44. 3 timepieces, 3 different answers. I noted this the way I note everything. By writing it down, I set my watch as the reference and moved on, because small discrepancies in clocks are normal, and because I was not yet in the habit of treating normal things as symptoms. On the wall beside the door, a laminated card. 4 station rules. 1. Log all observations in real time. Never backfill an entry from memory. 2. Identify yourself by station name, then personal call sign. Wait for dispatch to confirm your identity before transmitting operational content. 3. If your firefinder bearing disagrees with another source, report your reading as observed and note the discrepancy. Do not adjust your instrument. 4. Do not leave the tower unstaffed during daylight hours in fire season without logging your departure time, route, and expected return with dispatch. I committed them. Standing up, pack still on. That's what I do with rules. I absorb them. Dana would say I collect them the way other people collect excuses. I dropped the pack, opened the footlocker at the end of the bunk. Standard kit, blank weather observation forms, ruler, 2 pencils, field compass, signal mirror, first aid kit still in factory seal, and the station logbook. Green hardcover, government issue, column format, date, time, weather, wind, visibility, remarks. 3 seasons of entries. I flipped to the most recent page. Last entry, June 22nd, 3 days ago. Correct. My rotation started today, June 25th. Station unstaffed between rotations. Standard gap. But the handwriting in the final week of entries was different from the rest of the book. Earlier entries, months of them, were loose, efficient. Someone writing fast because the data was routine. But the last 6 entries were neater, deliberate, each letter formed with visible care, as though the writer had slowed down on purpose, as though the writing was being done for someone who would read it later. And those final entries covered June 23rd, 24th, and 25th. The unstaffed days. The gap when no one was supposed to be here. The weather data was specific. Temperature, humidity, wind, barometric trend, cloud type. I checked it against what I knew about late June conditions on the east slope. Consistent, plausible. The kind of data someone writes while looking at the sky and the instrument, not while remembering or inventing. I turned to today's entry, June 25th, 700, written in the deliberate hand. Station check-in transmitted. Lane, G on station. Operational. Someone wrote my check-in in this logbook before I arrived. I put the book down, picked it up, put it down again. Then I turned on the VHF radio and made what I believed was my first contact with dispatch. Bend dispatch, Spruce Peak lookout, Lane on station for initial check-in. The reply came immediately. Spruce Peak, Bend dispatch, copy. You're showing active since 0700. Everything tracking? Copy, dispatch. Station operational. Good to have you back on, Spruce Peak. Back on. That phrase hung in the cab like a wrong note. I had never staffed this tower. No one at the district knew me by voice. Back on is what you say to someone who left and returned. It assumes a prior presence. I spent the next hour unpacking methodically. Clothes in the footlocker. Books on the shelf. Margot's drawing. A crayon mountain with a small house on top. For you, Dad. I taped to the south-facing window where I'd see it every morning. Then I went through the cab piece by piece. Stove connections, radio battery backup, handheld charge, barometer calibration. The fire finder. The Osborne is the reason lookout towers exist. Circular map table, rotating sighting arm with crosshairs at each end, leveled and calibrated so that when you sight smoke through the alidate and read the azimuth ring, you get a true compass, bearing from your exact position. Another tower takes a bearing on the same smoke, where the lines cross. Fire. Its geometry held in brass, and I understood it the way I understand anything mechanical, with immediate, grateful precision. I cited two known landmarks, the communications tower on the East Ridge and the dam at the reservoir. Compared my readings to the benchmarks on the station reference card. Both were off by the same amount. 2.3 degrees high, consistent offset, thermal drift in the pedestal mounting, accumulated over winter and spring. Normal. I noted it in the log per Rule 3. Report what you see. Don't adjust. Then, already in the logbook, already bothered, I paged backward through the previous lookout's entries. His name was on the rotation schedule taped inside the footlocker lid. Elliot Mathen. Rotation May 1st through June 22nd. I'd never heard of him. His entries were professional, consistent, detailed. I cross-referenced 5 of his smoke reports against the printed fire summary tacked above the desk. A district document listing confirmed fire locations from last season. Every one of Mathen's bearings was offset from the confirmed locations by the same amount, 2.3 degrees. The firefinder had been serviced between seasons. Maintenance tag on the pedestal dated April. Mathen's instrument was recalibrated months ago. Whatever error he experienced would have been corrected. The current 2.3 degree offset accumulated fresh through new thermal conditions after that service. Mathen's bearings matched an error that didn't exist during his tenure. I closed the logbook and went to the catwalk. The wind was building from the southwest, pushing thermals up the drainage, and I could feel the humidity dropping. The afternoon would be dry and hot, and the forest was waiting for ignition the way a dry room waits for a match. These are things I notice because I was trained to notice them, and because noticing the physical world has always been easier for me than noticing what I don't want to see. That evening I unpacked the last of my personal gear and found the photograph, tucked inside the logbook's front cover, not glued, not taped, slipped between the cover and the first page, a 4x6 print, slightly faded, the view from the cab's north window, drainage running northeast, ridge behind it, reservoir glinting in the distance, a good clear day. The kind of photo a lookout takes to remember a posting. In the lower left corner, reflected in the window glass, a figure sitting at the desk. Facing the firefinder, wearing a green shirt, left hand flat on the desk surface, not curled, not resting, flat. The way I hold my left hand since the tendon injury from hand crew work 15 years ago. I was wearing a faded green Henley from a surplus store in Bend. The shirt was common. The posture was mine. I put the photograph back. I went to the bunk. I lay in the dark and listened to the grounding wires hum and told myself, coincidence. Tired. 41 years old in a glass box because your marriage ended and you needed a place where your worst quality was the only one required. Don't build a narrative. Do the job. Day 2. I gave myself to routine, and routine gave me a clean morning. Radio check at 700. Normal. Weather: 51 degrees. Humidity 28. Wind southwest at 5. Barometer 29.88. Visibility unrestricted. Logged in real time. 360 scan. No smoke. I transmitted the 1300 weather observation. Dispatch confirmed without commentary. I ate. I scanned. I started a letter to Margot describing the hawk that rides the thermals above the drainage. Wide brown wings. No effort. Just geometry and patience. At 14:30, I was at the desk writing when I reached for the logbook to double-check my afternoon visibility entry. As I turned the page, my thumb caught a texture on the next sheet. Tomorrow's page. June 26th. Blank. No writing visible, but there was a dent in the paper. A single impression near the top of the page, in the time column. I tilted the logbook into the afternoon light. 1. Someone had pressed hard enough on a page above to leave the ghost of a number on the page below. Tomorrow's date. The time for the morning radio check I hadn't yet made. I checked the page above. Today's page. No mark at the bottom that would correspond. The impression came from a page that was no longer in the book, or from a page that had been written and removed with enough care that the binding showed no damage. I ran my thumb across the impression 3 more times. It was real. It was in the logbook. It was the time I would be making a radio check that hadn't happened yet. I logged the anomaly in my personal notebook, not the official log, because I couldn't describe what I'd found without sounding like I was narrating my own confusion. I wrote, pressure impression, June 26th page. Time column, reads 700. Source unknown. No corresponding mark on adjacent pages. Binding intact. At 1700, during my final scan, I noticed the wall clock read 1703 and the field clock read 1707. My watch read 1700. The 3 clocks had drifted further apart since morning. That wasn't unusual in itself. Battery clocks lose time, wind-ups gain it. What was unusual was the direction. The field clock was now 7 minutes ahead of my watch. That morning it had been 4 minutes ahead. It was gaining time, not losing it. A wind-up clock that gains 3 minutes in 7 hours has something wrong with its mainspring or its escapement. Or someone wound it between scans while I was outside on the catwalk, which I'd been 3 times that afternoon. I opened the field clock's case. The winding key was in the position it reaches after a fresh wind. I had not wound it. It had been sitting at desk level beside the radio since I arrived, and the winding key position I remembered from the morning. Slightly recessed, consistent with a clock running down, was different from what I was looking at now. I closed the case. I wrote in my personal notebook, field clock wound between 700 and 1700. Not by me. Then I made my evening radio check and it was normal, and I ate dinner watching the drainage go dark, and told myself that paper holds impressions from manufacturing, from storage, from 100 mechanical sources that have nothing to do with intention, and that wind-up clocks sometimes have irregular springs that change tension with temperature. I didn't believe any of it, but I wrote it down because writing things down is how I process uncertainty, and processing is how I avoid the alternative, which is feeling it. Day 3. The personal fragments. I'd been reading backward through Mathen's entries since day 1, but on day 3, I went deeper into the remarks column, the narrow space beside the weather data, where lookouts occasionally note non-standard observations. Starting about 6 weeks before the end of Mathen's rotation, the remarks stopped being about fire or weather. June 10th. Clear. Viz unrestricted. Wind southwest 8. Humidity 19%. The apartment is smaller than expected but has enough light. June 12th. Partly cloudy. CU building west. Wind variable 5 to 10. Settlement language still doesn't feel like mine. June 14th. Clear, vis unrestricted. Smoke check negative. M's school schedule arrived. Joint decision, but it doesn't feel joint. M's school schedule, joint decision. Margot's school had sent next year's calendar to both me and Dana in April during custody finalization. Joint decision was a phrase from mediation. Used so many times it had gone sour. Smaller than expected, but has enough light. I said those exact words to a friend the week I moved into the Bend apartment. Once. Aloud. To a person with no connection to the Forest Service or this tower. Matten had his own life. His own divorce, presumably. His own M. The fragments could describe him, not me. Parallel, not connected. But the specificity, the exact phrasing, the settlement reference, the school schedule, was close enough to feel like finding my reflection in a window I hadn't looked into. I went to the rotation schedule. Before Matten D. Seward. Before Seward. The prior season, another name I didn't recognize. I wrote them all in my personal notebook and circled Mathen's and drew an arrow to the remarks column and wrote, personal content, verify. Then I made my afternoon weather transmission and dispatch confirmed. And everything was fine. And I hated how fine it was because fine was the thing the tower did best. And fine was starting to feel like a current I was standing in, rather than a condition I was choosing. Day 4. I did something operational. I radioed the district office during business hours and asked to speak with someone in staffing about the Spruce Peak rotation history. Cheryl? The clerk. Friendly voice. Professional. I asked about Elliot Matten. Completed his rotation. Evaluation satisfactory. No incidents. Can you tell me anything about D. Seward? The rotation before Matten. Same. Satisfactory. Standard seasonal. Do you have forwarding contacts for either of them? I can check. Hold on. I waited on frequency. 15 minutes. The hawk was back on the thermals, drawing circles over the drainage like a compass needle that couldn't find north. Cheryl returned. Mr. Lane, the forwarding address on file for Elliot Matten is... She read my apartment address in Bend. Building. Unit number. I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Cheryl, that's my address. That's what's in the system. It's been there since his initial application. When was his application? Last November. In November, I was living with Dana. The apartment wasn't mine until February. The address didn't exist in connection to my name until 3 months after Matten apparently wrote it on a federal form. What about Seward? Another pause. Longer. The forwarding address for D. Seward is also that address. Same unit. 2 different men. 2 different rotations. Same forwarding address. My address. An address that wasn't mine when either of them filed. Thank you, Cheryl. Is there a problem, Mr. Lane? Not yet. I signed off and sat with the radio in my hands and thought about institutional databases and how they store information and how easy it would be for a single address field to propagate through a system if it were linked to a position rather than a person. If the system tracked the post, Spruce Peak Lookout, and attached a rolling set of attributes to it. Address, call sign, physical description, and those attributes updated forward but bled backward through records that nobody audited because nobody had reason to. It was a theory. It was a clean theory. It explained the address. It did not explain the handwriting. It did not explain the 2.3 degrees. It did not explain the personal fragment or the photograph or the check-in that happened while I was still in my truck. That afternoon I did my boundary walk. Every lookout station has a defined observation area. The terrain you're responsible for monitoring. At Spruce Peak, the observation boundary runs along the ridgeline to the east, the reservoir drainage to the northeast, the county road corridor to the south, and a decommissioned trail system to the northwest. Twice during a rotation, Lookouts are expected to hike a portion of the boundary and confirm ground-level conditions, fuel moisture, trail access, any structural hazards. It's documented in the station manual. You log your departure, your route, your return. I logged my departure at 14:30. Route, south boundary, catwalk to saddle trail, to County Road viewpoint and back. Estimated distance, 2.6 miles round trip. Expected return, 1600. The saddle trail drops off the ridge through a stand of ponderosa and meets a rocky viewpoint above the County Road corridor about 1.3 miles from the tower. Easy hike. 30 minutes down, 40 back because of the elevation gain on return. I've done similar walks hundreds of times in my career. I reached the viewpoint at 15:05. Noted fuel conditions. Dry, cured grass in the open patches. Litter depth moderate under the ponderosa. Took a bearing on a reference point along the county road to cross-check my firefinder. The intersection with Forest Road 2647 was visible from the viewpoint, and I shot it with the field compass at 178 degrees. That would matter later. I turned around and hiked back. The return was steeper than I expected. I'd underestimated the grade on the way down, the way you do when gravity is doing the work. I reached the tower at 15:54. I climbed the stairs and logged my return, 1554. 6 minutes ahead of schedule. I wrote the fuel conditions and the compass bearing in the logbook. Then I checked the time column for my departure. I had written 14:30. I remembered writing 14:30. I had looked at my watch as I wrote it. The logbook said 14:15. I stared at it. The handwriting was mine. The entry was in the correct row. But the time was wrong, 15 minutes earlier than I had departed. I had not left at 14:15. At 14:15 I was still at the desk, finishing my 1300 weather form and debating whether the boundary walk was worth doing this late in the day. I looked at the pen in my hand. I looked at the logbook. The number was there in ink that matched the rest of my day's entries. It was my handwriting. But it was wrong. Rule 1. Log in real time. I had. I wrote 14:30 because it was 14:30 when I left. But the logbook said 14:15, and the logbook was the official record. If anyone ever checked. And in firework, people do check. The record would show I departed 15 minutes before I actually did, which would mean I covered the 2.6-mile route in 1 hour and 39 minutes instead of 1 hour and 24 minutes. Not a significant difference. Not suspicious, but wrong. Wrong in a way that only I would notice, and wrong in a way that made the record slightly more consistent. Because 14:15 to 15:54 is a more plausible pace for that terrain than 14:30 to 15:54, which is fast. The record had corrected my timing to make itself more believable. I did not cross out the 1415 and rewrite it. Rule 1 says never backfill from memory. If I corrected the entry now, I'd be writing a time I remembered rather than a time I was observing. I'd be violating the rule to fix a record that had already violated something larger. Instead, I wrote in the remarks column, departure time as logged may be inaccurate. My watch read 14:30 at departure. Discrepancy noted. That was the first time I'd put a contradiction into the official log instead of my personal notebook. It felt different. It felt like speaking up in a room where everyone else was reading from the same page. Day 5. The Phantom Report. I spotted smoke at 1317. Thin column. Northeast drainage. 12 miles below the reservoir. White at the base. I centered the alidade. Read the bearing. 047 degrees. Keyed the mic. Bend dispatch, Spruce Peak. Single column smoke. Bearing 047. Estimated 12. Copy, Spruce Peak. 047, 12 miles. Township 21 south. Range 9 east, Section 14. White column. No visible spread. Consistent with your earlier report. Do you have an update on column behavior? I hadn't finished my sentence. I hadn't given the township, the range, the section, and I had not made an earlier report. Dispatch. Negative on earlier report. This is my initial sighting. Spruce Peak. We have a smoke report from your station at 1104, bearing 047, 12 miles, single column. White at base. Time-stamped and logged under your call sign. Your current report is consistent. At 11:04, I'd been at the desk drawing the tower for Margot's next letter. I had not seen smoke. I had not keyed the mic. Can you confirm the identifier on the 1104 report? Your station call sign and personal ID. Standard format. I checked the logbook. Nothing for 1104, but the grooves were there when I ran my finger across the page. A complete entry pressed into the paper. Time, bearing, column description, distance. Written and then erased, or written on a sheet that was removed. The binding was intact. The page numbers were sequential. Dispatch, I'm noting a discrepancy. I have no record of the 1104 transmission. Copy. Spruce Peak. Initial attack is notified. Dispatch out. I set down the mic. The smoke was real. The bearing was correct. The data was accurate. Someone had reported my fire from my station under my name 2 hours before I saw it, and initial attack had been notified. That meant real resources were moving. An engine, maybe 2. Possibly air support if conditions warranted. Crews mobilized. Fuel burned. Personnel deployed. All based on a report I did not make, filed under my name from a station where I was the only person. If the smoke had been false, if the data had been wrong, those resources would have been wasted and the investigation would have come back to me, to my call sign, my log, my identifier. I would have been the one to explain a false report, but the data was right. The smoke was there. The bearing matched, and so the system had no reason to question any of it. The false report was indistinguishable from a perfect report because the only thing false about it was the author. The rules on the wall were useless against this. Rule 1 says log in real time. Someone had. Rule 2 says identify by station and call sign and wait for confirmation. Someone had. Rule 3 says report your reading as observed. Someone had. And their reading was correct. Rule 4 says log your movements. Someone was logging mine. The rules weren't broken. They were fulfilled. By someone who wasn't me, operating under my identity, with data that matched or preceded my own. The institutional structure I had come here to inhabit was performing exactly as designed. It just didn't require me to be the one inside it. Day 6. I decided to test something. I took the backup handheld, set it to record on Vox activation, and placed it on the desk beside the main radio at 2100. I logged this in my personal notebook. Recorder test. Handheld on Vox. Desk position. Purpose. Verify no unauthorized transmission from station equipment during overnight period. Before sleep, I also made a deliberate choice. I had been planning to do my morning weather observation at the usual time, 700, as part of the radio check. But that night, I decided I would change the order. I would take the barometric reading at 0645 instead, before the radio check, and record it in the log first. A small variation. An operational choice that no one could predict because I hadn't made it until that moment, lying in the bunk in the dark. I went to sleep. I slept badly, not from fear, but from the particular exhaustion of a mind that won't stop auditing itself. I woke at 5:30 and checked the handheld. The Vox had activated 3 times. The first activation was at 0147. Static. Wind noise through the cab walls. expected. The Vox threshold was sensitive enough to catch ambient sound. The second was at 0214, more static, but with a brief tonal artifact underneath. Could have been electrical interference from the grounding wires. Could have been nothing. The third activation was at 0347. I played it back, and the sound that came out of that handheld is something I will carry for the rest of my life. My call sign, spoken in a voice that was not mine, but was close enough that I had to play it 3 times before I was certain. The voice said, "Bend. Dispatch, Spruce Peak Lookout. Oh, 347. Lightning check negative. No activity observed. Resuming standard monitoring." A lightning check at 0347 during a clear night with no storm activity anywhere in the district. Then the voice continued, and this is the part that I replayed 11 times, sitting on the edge of the bunk with the handheld pressed against my ear and the morning light coming through the glass walls. Oh, 6:45 weather observation. Barometer 29.81, falling 1. The time I had decided, silently in my own mind, in the dark, to take the barometric reading. A decision I hadn't spoken aloud, hadn't written down, hadn't told anyone. A time that didn't match any protocol or any schedule. A time I chose specifically because it was arbitrary. I looked at the barometer on the wall. It read 29.84. At 0530 it still had 3 hours of drift ahead of it. I checked my evening log. 29.88. The barometric pressure was falling, and at its current rate it would reach 29.81 at approximately. I did the math twice. 0645. The recording at 0347 contained a weather observation timestamped for 0645 with a barometric reading that the instrument would not display for another 3 hours, and it was filed at a time I had privately, silently chosen as a deviation from standard procedure. The voice knew the reading before the barometer did, and it knew my schedule before I did. The Vox had not activated the main radio. No transmission had gone to dispatch. The handheld captured a sound inside the cab. A voice speaking a report into the air of the room where I was sleeping, 3 feet away, reporting data that hadn't happened yet, at a time that existed only in my head. I saved the recording. I logged it. I did not transmit to dispatch because I could not construct a sentence that would sound professional rather than disintegrating, and I sat with the handheld in my hands and understood that whatever was operating under my name was not limited to the radio system or the logbook or the paper. It was in the room. It was in the schedule. It was ahead of me in a way that made ahead feel like a direction I could no longer trust. Not a presence, not a haunting. An operational pattern that was closer to me than I was to myself, and faster. At 0645, I took the barometric reading. The barometer read 29.81. I wrote it in the log. The number was already on the recording. I was filling in a column that had been pre-authored by a voice in an empty room while I slept. I wrote it anyway, because Rule 1 says log in real time, and because by day 6, following the rules and surrendering to the pattern had become almost indistinguishable, and the almost was the only territory I had left. Day 7. The transfer form. I tore the footlocker apart. Not methodically this time. I pulled everything out and laid it on the bunk and went through every document. Under the blank weather forms, under the spare pencils, beneath the rotation schedule. 1 sheet. Station transfer form. Outgoing lookout. Elliot Mathen. Station, Spruce Peak. Date, June 28th. 2 days from now. Incoming lookout. Garrett Lane. Station, Spruce Peak. Date, June 28th. Both lines signed. The outgoing signature matched Mathen's deliberate logbook hand. The incoming signature was mine. The truncated G. The disconnected L. 2 strokes. Tendon injury. 15 years. The too narrow gap between names that Dana said made it look like I was in a hurry to finish being myself. The heavy downstroke on the final E. A signature I did not write. On a form I did not see. Dated for a day that has not arrived. I photographed it. 3 angles. Close on both signatures. I set the form on the desk and placed the logbook beside it and the photograph beside that. And I stood over all 3 and looked at them the way you look at a map after you realize you've been reading it upside down. The tower was not malfunctioning. The tower was functioning. It was producing continuity, an unbroken chain of observation, identity, and record that stretched across rotations without interruption. And the mechanism of that continuity was not supernatural, it was procedural. It was the rules on the wall, the forms in the footlocker, the call sign protocol, the standardized logbook. The system didn't need to know who was writing. It needed the writing to continue. I thought about calling Dana, not about the tower. I wouldn't know how to start. But just to hear a voice that was connected to a person who knew me as a specific human being, and not as a call sign. I thought about what she'd say. She'd probably say I was doing it again, making a system out of a feeling, treating the mystery like a problem with a clean solution instead of sitting with the discomfort of not knowing. She'd be right, and the tower would still be functioning. I didn't call. Day 8. I followed the map. The folded topo map from Mathen's Effects had a hand-drawn route, dotted line from the tower northwest, down the decommissioned trail toward a creek junction labeled Soda Fork. I logged my departure per Rule 4. Time, 08:15. Route, Spruce Peak to Soda Fork via Northwest Trail. Expected return, 1400. I logged it carefully. I watched myself write the time, 0815. I confirmed it against my watch. I photographed the entry with my phone before I closed the book. The hike was 4.3 miles of rough trail, washout section, boulder field detour, dense second-growth Douglas fir with a canopy so tight the understory was dead. The forest floor was brown needles and silence and the particular stillness of a place that doesn't care whether you're there. At 1.8 miles I crossed the washout, a section where the trail had been scoured to bedrock by a debris flow. The detour around it ran through a boulder field above the creek, maybe 300 yards of scrambling. On the far side, where the trail resumed, I noticed a blaze mark on a Douglas fir at eye level. Old, healed over, but clearly cut. And below the blaze, at the base of the tree, a small cairn, 5 stones, deliberate, recent enough that no moss had established on the surfaces. I hadn't expected to find markers. The trail was decommissioned. Nobody maintained it. But someone had been through here recently enough to stack stones. I kept going. At 2.7 miles, another cairn. At 3.4, another. They weren't navigation markers. The trail was obvious enough. They were something else. Confirmation, maybe. Evidence that a person with a body and feet and hands had walked this route and wanted the next person to know. Soda Fork. Flat gravel bench where 2 drainages merge under a rock overhang. Old spike camp. Firing. Rebar in a tree trunk. Under the overhang, a green tarp. Sealed storage bin. Backpacking stove. Foam pad. And on the bin, held down by a river stone, a black composition notebook. First page. If you're reading this, you're Garrett, and you came on the day I said you would. I turned to the last page of Mathen's logbook entries. In the remarks column, 6 weeks before my arrival during his rotation, Northwest Foot Patrol, departure 0815, Soda Fork, return 1400. My route, my time, logged under his name before I existed on this mountain. I sat on the gravel beside the creek and read the journal. Matten wrote clean, controlled prose. The kind a man produces when he's been alone long enough, that precision is the last form of companionship he trusts. He described arriving at Spruce Peak and finding a logbook with final entries in an unfamiliar hand, a firefinder error that matched the prior season impossibly, a photograph, personal fragments, a pre-signed transfer form. He'd found what I found, left by D. Seward, and Seward's cache, at a different location, along a different closed trail, contained a journal describing the same discovery, attributed to the lookout before him. Mathen's theory was not supernatural. He thought the job was a filter. Same posting, same wound, same type of man. Divorced, observation-trained, control-dependent. The system didn't need to predict the next lookout. It just needed to keep selecting from the same narrow pool, and the pool produced men who were close enough, in habits, in handwriting, in calibration tolerance, in psychological structure, that the institutional record couldn't distinguish between them. But his certainty eroded as the journal went on. The early pages were analytical. The later pages were more careful, more hedged, more honest about what the theory couldn't reach. He wrote, "I can feel the gap. The record has a space where the next season should be, and it's shaped like a person I haven't met. Filling it doesn't feel like forgery. It feels like completing a column. I know that sounds like rationalization. I'm not sure it isn't." He wrote, "I seeded some of the entries. Not all. Some of what the next person finds was already there when I arrived. Some of it I added. I can no longer tell which is which. That should frighten me more than it does." He wrote, "The selection theory covers maybe 60% of this. It explains why the men are similar. It explains the parallel wounds, the addresses, the handwriting convergence. It does not explain the check-in. It does not explain the voice on the recorder. Seward mentions it too. Same hour, same kind of reading. It does not explain how the records contain information that hasn't happened yet. I don't have a theory for that part. I have an observation. The record wants to be complete, more than it wants to be accurate. And I don't know if that's the institution or something the institution created by accident. I'm telling you what I believe, not what I know. Those are different things, and I've stopped pretending otherwise." I closed the journal, repacked the bin, hiked back. The return trip should have taken 2 hours and 15 minutes at my pace, uphill, with the boulder field. I checked my watch at Soda Fork before departing. 11:39. Expected arrival, approximately 13:54. I arrived at the tower at 13:56. Check. Close enough. I climbed the stairs, opened the logbook to record my return. The departure time I had written that morning, 8:15. Carefully. Watched. Photographed. Read 0815 in the logbook. Unchanged. Good. But there was a new entry below it. In my handwriting. Recording my return. Return to station 1356. Conditions observed en route. Dry fuels. Moderate litter depth. No structural hazards. Cairns noted at 1.8, 2.7, and 3.4 miles. Creek flow at Soda Fork low. Approximately 2 cubic feet per second. I had not written this entry. I had just arrived. I was holding the pen. The logbook was open, and the entry was there, in ink that matched mine, describing details I had observed but not yet recorded, including the cairns, which I had not mentioned to anyone. The creek flow estimate was wrong, though. I would have said closer to 3 or 4 cubic feet per second. The entry said 2. It was the first error. The first time the pre-authored record was not perfectly accurate, and instead of making me feel better, proving it was fallible, the error made it worse. Because an imperfect forgery is more human than a perfect one. A perfect copy is a machine. An imperfect copy is someone trying. I crossed out the pre-written return entry with a single line. I wrote beside it, "Entry not made by this lookout. Return logged now, in my hand. 1358. The 2-minute difference between the pre-written time and my corrected time was the width of the gap I was living in. Day 9. Night. I was at the firefinder doing a late scan. Dry air. Justified vigilance. Radio on low. District tactical frequency. The radio activated. Ben dispatch. Spruce Peak lookout. 21:17 weather check. Temperature 42. Humidity 16%. Wind west-southwest at 4. Barometer 29.79. Visibility unrestricted. Not my voice, but close. The pacing I use. The pause between humidity and wind. The flat, procedurally correct cadence. Dispatch. Copy. Spruce Peak. 21:17 check received. I checked the instruments. 42. 16%. West-southwest at 4. 29.79. Correct. Exactly. I grabbed the mic. Dispatch. Spruce Peak actual. I did not make that transmission. This is Spruce Peak Lookout Lane. Garrett. Transmitting from the station VHF at this time. The previous transmission did not originate from me. I was following Rule 2 to the letter. Station name. Personal call sign. Waiting for identity confirmation before operational content. Exactly as written on the laminated card 4 feet from my head. Spruce Peak. We're showing one check-in at 21:17. Your call sign, your identifier. Standard format. Are you reporting a duplicate? I'm reporting that someone transmitted under my call sign, and I am not that person. I need you to flag this as an unauthorized use of station credentials. Silence. Then, Spruce Peak, can you confirm your identity for verification? Station, Spruce Peak. Lookout, Lane, Garrett, GS4, seasonal. Rotation start, June 25th. Personal identifier, Sierra Papa Lima 01. Copy. That matches our file. It also matches the transmission at 21:17. Of course it did. 2 voices, same protocol, same credentials, same data. The rule was designed to prevent this kind of confusion. It was designed to make identity verification simple and clean, and it was completely, structurally useless, because identity verification works by matching a voice to a file. When 2 voices match the same file with the same data at the same station, the system has no mechanism to prefer one over the other. Rule 2 didn't protect me. Rule 2 proved I was replaceable. Dispatch, I am the person physically present in the Spruce Peak cab, holding the station radio. The other transmission originated from a different source. Copy. Spruce Peak. We'll note your concern. Do you want a security review? I thought about what a security review would find. 2 sets of identical data, 1 station, 1 call sign, and no forensic tool in the district's inventory capable of distinguishing between a legitimate transmission from a staffed tower and an identical transmission from a source that shouldn't exist. Negative on the review. I'm noting it in the station log. Copy. Spruce Peak. I logged it in pen. My hand. My words. Transmission received by dispatch at 2117 attributed to this station. I did not make this transmission. Source unknown. Conditions reported match current instruments exactly. Rule 2. Identity protocol, followed by both this lookout and the unauthorized source. Protocol, unable to differentiate. That last sentence was the one that mattered. I was documenting the failure of the safeguard, not because the rule was badly written, but because the rule assumed that only one person would ever perfectly match the identity file. When the assumption failed, the rule became a mirror instead of a gate. Day 10. I made two decisions. The first, I radioed Matten. I tuned the handheld to the simplex frequency from his journal margin and keyed the mic. Matten, I'm at Spruce Peak. I know you're at Soda Fork. 30 seconds of static. I know. I was you last year. His voice was lighter than the one on the weather check but shared its pacing. Controlled. Adult. The voice of a man who has been alone long enough. That speech has become a tool he maintains rather than a habit he indulges. You're still filing under my call sign, I said. Some of it is me, not all of it. Which part? I don't know anymore. I seeded some entries. I made some transmissions. But the check-in on your first morning, the one logged before you arrived, I didn't do that. I was at Soda Fork. 4 miles away, no line of sight to the repeater from that drainage. The 1104 smoke report. The smoke wasn't visible from my position at that time. I couldn't have filed it. Then, what did? I don't know, I used to think I knew. I had a clean theory about selection and institutional momentum. It covered most of it, it covered enough. But there are parts it doesn't cover. And I've stopped pretending they're minor. The voice on my recorder, at 0347, that was inside the cab. Silence. Then, Seward mentions the same thing in his journal. Same hour. A voice in the room that doesn't reach dispatch. He called it a rehearsal. I don't know if that's right. It might be closer to say, the record practices, like a draft that exists in the air before it gets written down. That's not a theory. That's a metaphor. I know I'm out of theories. I have observations and I have one piece of honesty, which is that I've been out here 3 weeks, and I'm less certain now than I was on day one. The pattern is real. The mechanism is. I don't know what the mechanism is. Something institutional, something procedural. Something about the format being old enough and consistent enough that it doesn't need a person anymore. But I could be wrong about all of it. I'm telling you what I've seen. Not what I understand. What do you want from me? I want to know if you're going to complete the transfer. The form is pre-signed. I know. I signed the outgoing line. I forged your incoming signature from handwriting patterns in the prior logs. Why? Because the line was empty, and I couldn't leave it empty. I can't explain that in a way that sounds rational. It felt like leaving a door open in a building I was responsible for. It felt procedural. It felt like the right thing to do, and that's the part that scares me because I know it wasn't. And if I don't sign it, a long pause, then you'd be the first. And I don't know what happens. None of us have tested it. None of you wanted to. We all wanted to. Wanting to doesn't mean much up here. The tower is very good at making compliance feel like competence. I turned off the handheld, stood on the catwalk. The stars were out. The drainage was dark. The wind was gone, and the air was still and cold, and the grounding wires were silent for the first time since I arrived. The second decision I made on day 10 was the one that would determine everything. I sat at the desk with the Vox handheld, the logbook, a pen, and my personal notebook. And I wrote, in my own hand on blank paper, not in the logbook, a complete account of every anomaly since my arrival, not formatted, not columned, not standardized. I wrote in paragraphs that ran long, and sentences that doubled back on themselves, and descriptions that were mine and only mine, because they were imperfect and personal, and it could not be generated by a system that valued consistency above identity. I wrote about Dana, about Margot's drawing, about the surplus store, Henley and the tendon injury, and the way I hold my left hand flat when I read. I wrote about what joint decision meant in the context of losing a marriage. I wrote about the apartment being smaller than expected and having enough light, and how those words came out of my mouth once, to one person, and appeared in a government logbook months later. I wrote about the 0347 recording and the barometric reading that was correct 3 hours before the barometer reached it, and the time I had chosen in silence in the dark of my own mind. I wrote about what the tower was offering me, a system so complete it didn't need me to be a person, only consistent, only procedural, only the same as the man before and the man before that, filling the same columns on the same schedule, indistinguishable, replaceable, maintained. I wrote about how the offer was almost comfortable, how part of me, the part that brought a checklist to a birthday party, the part that optimized Dana out of her own home, the part that portioned food into labeled bags, recognized the tower's logic as native, fluent, a place where my worst quality wasn't a flaw, but a frequency, and all I had to do was tune to it and let the signal carry me. I wrote about why that was the thing to be afraid of, and I wrote about Margot, about the drawing on the south window, the crayon mountain with the little house, and the careful 9-year-old letters, about how the drawing was the one thing in the cab that wasn't procedural, wasn't formatted, wasn't reproducible by the next man to climb these stairs. Margot didn't draw a system. She drew a place for her father, specific, singular, made once by one hand that would never make exactly the same thing again. That was the difference. That was what the tower couldn't generate. Day 11. The smoke report. The cold open. Bearing 047, 12 miles. And dispatch reading back details I hadn't transmitted, consistent with an earlier report I hadn't made. Now it had context. Now it was a pattern with shape but no edges. After the smoke report, I made one final radio check using the station VHF. Bend dispatch, Spruce Peak Lookout, Lane confirming station identity for the record. Copy, Spruce Peak. You're confirmed active. Lane, G. Dispatch, I want to confirm. How many active identifiers do you have logged for this station during the current rotation? Pause. Spruce Peak, we show one active lookout, one call sign, continuous since June 25th. Continuous. No gaps. No gaps. Your check-ins have been consistent. Is there a problem? Consistent. The word the system values above all others. My check-ins had been consistent. Even the ones I didn't make. Especially the ones I didn't make. Negative. Dispatch. Confirming the record. Copy. Dispatch out. I turned off the radio. I sat in the glass box 40 feet above the tree line and looked at the smoke scar and the reservoir and the ridge, and I made the decision I'd been circling since day 7. I was not going to sign the transfer form. I was not going to complete the record. I was not going to be the next clean entry in a logbook that had already written me. At 1400, the radio came on by itself, not the handheld. The station VHF main unit, desk-mounted, connected to the antenna on the cab roof. The transmission light activated, outgoing, and a voice began speaking. My call sign, my station, my identifier, a closure confirmation. Bend dispatch, Spruce Peak Lookout, Lane, G, filing end of rotation confirmation. Station transfer complete. Continuity confirmed. Log sealed. Spruce Peak returning to standby for incoming rotation. The voice was not Matten's. It was closer to mine than anything I'd heard. Same flatness, same pacing, same micro pause between data elements, but emptied of something I can only describe as weight. It had my pattern without my breath, my cadence without my lungs, my words without the man who chose them. Dispatch responded instantly. Copy Spruce Peak. End of rotation confirmation received. Transfer logged. Good work this season, Spruce Peak. Dispatch. A new voice broke in. Younger. Different station. Dispatch. Black Butte. Lookout. Be advised I have Spruce Peak's last bearing confirmed from my position. 047 smoke is now at estimated 3 acres with visible spread. Requesting update on Spruce Peak status for continued monitoring. Black Butte, copy. Spruce Peak is end of rotation. Station transitioning to standby. The fire I had reported was growing. Another station was requesting coordination. And dispatch had just taken Spruce Peak offline. Because the voice had closed my rotation. Because the record said I was done. The system was acting on it. Real decisions. Real consequences. Real acres burning while my station was logged as empty because a voice that wasn't mine said the shift was over. Dispatch. Spruce Peak. Actual. I was on the mic now, talking over the end of the Black Butte exchange. I am still on station. I am still active. My rotation is not complete. That closure confirmation was not authorized by me. Do not take Spruce Peak offline. The 047 fire is active in my observation area and I am monitoring. Dead air. 3 seconds. 5. Spruce Peak. We show your end of rotation, confirmed at 14:02. Are you? Are you rescinding that confirmation? I am telling you it was never mine to rescind. I did not make it. I am on station. I am active. Put me back on the board. I could hear the confusion in the dispatch room. A murmur. Someone talking to someone else off mic. Then, Spruce Peak. We need to verify. Can you confirm current conditions at your station for cross-reference? Temperature 68. Humidity 14%. Wind southwest at 12 gusting 18. Barometer 29.74, falling. The 047 smoke is now showing a grey column with drift to the north-northeast. Estimated 4 to 5 acres. Dispatch. I am looking at this fire right now. I am at the firefinder. I am in this cab. Put me back on the board. Another pause, then carefully. Spruce Peak, you're restored to active status. We're flagging the 14:02 confirmation for review. Continue monitoring on the 047 smoke. And Mr. Lane, we're going to need an incident report on this. I know. I'm going to file it in person. In person. I'm leaving station after this fire is contained or reassigned. I'm going to drive to the district office and file a report in my own hand, in front of a witness, on paper, that hasn't been pre-written. Copy. We copy Spruce Peak. And dispatch. Note this. The person filing this transmission is the same person who will walk into the district office. One person. One voice. One hand. If anyone files anything under my name between now and when I arrive, it wasn't me. Confirm you have that. Spruce Peak. Confirmed. Spruce Peak out. I monitored the fire for 3 more hours. I gave update. I adjusted bearings as the column shifted. I did the job. The real job. The one that matters. The one where your observation keeps a fire from becoming a disaster, and your data puts the right crew on the right ridge at the right time. I did it as myself, under my name, with my voice, my breath, my eyes on the instrument, my hand on the mic. And every update I gave, dispatch confirmed with the faintest hesitation. A half-second pause before the copy, as though they were checking, each time, whether the voice was the real one. I couldn't blame them. They had no way to tell. When the fire was reassigned to ground resources at 17:30, I packed. The logbook, the transfer form, the photograph, Mathen's journal and map, the handheld with the 0347 recording, the handwritten account from day 10, everything into the pack. I wrote one final line in the logbook. This entry is mine. It is the last one I am certain of. Garrett Lane in his own hand. Alone in the cab. June 26th, 1735. I peeled Margot's drawing from the south window and taped it inside the logbook's back cover, It would travel with the evidence instead of staying on a window in an empty tower. The tape left a small, clean rectangle on the glass where the sun hadn't faded the surface. A blank space shaped like a mountain with a house on it. I hiked down, loaded the truck, drove to Bend. 9 hours. I didn't stop. I didn't turn on the truck radio. I sat in the silence of the cab and watched the road and the headlights carving a tunnel in the dark, and I felt, for the first time in months, something that wasn't procedure or analysis or the comfortable numbness of filling in columns. I felt like a person doing something no one had written down for me first. It was terrifying. It was the first real thing I'd done since signing the divorce papers, and the similarity, the act of refusal as an act of authorship, was not lost on me. Dana had refused to be a variable. I was refusing to be a call sign. We were both, in our own way, insisting on being specific in a system that only needed us to be consistent. The district office was closed when I arrived. I waited in the parking lot until 800. Cheryl was the first through the door. Same clerk. Same voice. I set the stack on the counter. My name is Garrett Lane. I need to file an incident report. It needs to be handwritten, original, and witnessed. And it needs to not match anything already in your system. Cheryl looked at the stack. At me. At the logbook with a crayon drawing taped inside its back cover. What do you mean, not match? I mean, someone has been filing under my name, and the only way to prove which documents are mine is to write one in front of a person who can confirm that the hand they watched was attached to the man standing here. She got me a conference room, a blank form, a pen. I asked for a pen, not a pencil, because pencil can be erased, and I was done with erasure. She sat across from me. I wrote everything. 3 hours. I let it be long and imperfect and personal. I crossed out words and rewrote them instead of starting over, because I wanted the corrections in the record. Proof of a hand that hesitates. That changes its mind. That can't produce a clean first draft. Proof of a human being writing in real time, with all the mess that implies. When I finished, Cheryl countersigned as witness to the authorship. Not standard procedure, but I asked, and she didn't refuse. The report entered the system as a standalone document, not cross-referenced. Not linked to the Spruce Peak operational log, or to Mathen's file, or to anyone's file. On account, one author, one witness, unique. They opened a review. I lost the post. During the review, they found irregularities reaching back 4 rotations. Handwriting inconsistencies, address duplications, closure confirmations that didn't align with personnel records, forwarding addresses that predated the tenants. The kind of anomalies a system built on standardized data is structurally incapable of detecting, because detecting them would require the system to care which human being produced the output, and systems don't care about that. That's not what they're for. Spruce Peak was decommissioned pending full audit. A man at the district, not Cheryl, someone senior, told me my report had introduced ambiguity into a previously clean record. He said it like I'd contaminated something healthy. I almost told him that the record was never clean. That consistent and clean are not the same thing when the consistency is achieved by ignoring which hand held the pencil. I almost told him that a record which can't distinguish between 4 different men across 4 different years isn't clean. It's blind, and its blindness is a design feature, not a flaw. I didn't say any of that. I signed the exit paperwork and drove home. The apartment, smaller than expected, enough light. I put the incident report receipt on the refrigerator with a magnet, next to the blank spot where Margot's drawing used to hang. It was in the evidence file now, inside the logbook. I'd ask her to make me another one. Something new. Something only she could make. Unrepeatable in her hand, with her colors, for no reason other than that she wanted to. I enrolled in a Tuesday night cooking class Because Margot said she wanted to learn to make pasta, and I didn't know how. The instructor told me I was overworking the dough. She was right. I was treating it like data. Measuring, correcting, optimizing. She put her hand on my wrist and said, "You have to let it be uneven. That's what makes it food instead of product." I thought about the logbook. I thought about Rule 1. I let the dough be uneven. Margot came for a full week in August. She asked about the tower. She liked the letters I'd sent. The hawk, the firefinder, the way the light changed the drainage from gold to black. She asked if I'd go back. I told her it was a good place to watch from, but not a good place to stay. She said, "Because you got lonely." I said, "Because it was too easy not to be." She didn't understand that. I hope she never does. She made me a new drawing that week. Same mountain, same little house on top. But she added a figure on the catwalk. She said it was me. The figure had both hands at its sides. Not flat on anything, not braced. Just hanging there. Relaxed. I put it on the refrigerator next to the receipt. The night before she went back to Dana's, she fell asleep on the couch under a blanket she'd pulled from the closet without asking, because she has decided this apartment is hers too. I sat in the kitchen with the lights low and looked at the receipt and the new drawing, the two documents that meant the most to me. One proved I existed because a woman watched me write. The other proved I existed because a child drew me without instructions. I opened my laptop. One new email. Sender, a string of characters at a generic domain. Not .gov, not district. Subject, rotation available. Seasonal lookout. Spruce Peak. Dear Mr. Lane, based on your prior service record, we are pleased to offer you the upcoming season at Spruce Peak Lookout. Your transfer form is attached. I opened the attachment. Station transfer form. Outgoing lookout. Blank. Incoming lookout. Garrett Lane. Date, next May. The signature line was filled. The truncated G. The disconnected L. The heavy downstroke on the E. I closed the laptop. I listened to Margot breathing in the next room. I looked at the receipt on the refrigerator and the drawing beside it. A mountain with a house on top, and a man on the catwalk with his hands at his sides. I didn't delete the email. I didn't open the attachment again. I didn't close the tab. Somewhere on a ridge in the Cascades, a tower sits empty above a drainage that runs northeast toward a reservoir. The firefinder is covered. The logbook is in an evidence box in Bend. The catwalk is empty. The radio is off. The system still has me listed. Spruce Peak Lookout. Lane. G status. Operational. I told Margot the tower was a good place to watch from. I didn't tell her it never stopped.